All right, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Antoinette Rangel. I'm class of 2009 and one of the NYC alumni chapter volunteers. We're so excited to host our 4th edition of Middlebury Wine School. For those who have joined us for other sessions, welcome back. And for those just tuning in for the first time, we're so happy to have you. Before I introduce our host this evening, when we planned this tasting focused on Oregon, we couldn't have known that the state, along with the rest of the West Coast, would soon be devastated by wildfires. So we just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the horrible wildfires that have spread across our country and send our collective thoughts to those impacted and the first responders who are working to keep us safe. It's times like these that I feel particularly grateful to be part of a community like Middlebury, especially one that passionately works to address the underlying issue of climate change. So now I'm going to cover some housekeeping items for tonight. This is a Zoom meeting. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Zoom now, but you can turn your camera on and see other participants who do so as well. There are quite a few of us here. We're at 145 people. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, you can click on the gallery view in your upper right-hand corner, and that way you can find your friends who also turn their camera on. And we encourage you guys to turn your camera on if you feel so inclined, just because it's really fun to enjoy wine together in this virtual space. We're going to mute all participants throughout the duration of the event, but we encourage you to use that chat feature to ask any questions, and I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the evening and ask Howard your questions. And also feel free to drop in the chat where you're tuning in from and your class year. It's so wonderful to see Middlebury alumni joining us from all over the world. So for the next 45 minutes or so, all you need is yourself and your Oregon wines. And with that, I introduce to you Middlebury parent, Howard Rossbach. Howard first fell in love with wine as an undergrad, studying botany at the University of Washington. While in college, Howard worked part-time at a wine shop, and from then his passion for wine grew. And he's been in the wine business since 1975, moving from retail sales to ownership of a winery and vineyards in the celebrated heartland of Oregon. Howard currently serves as the president of the Northwest Wine Coalition, which is a group that oversees the export programs for Washington and Oregon wine industries. Howard now focuses on producing wines from his Citation and Centerstone labels while continuing to own and operate the Erratic Oaks vineyard. And lucky for us, we're going to be tasting through both those labels this evening. And we'd like to thank Howard for hosting this Middlebury Wine School and for giving us that fabulous discount and free shipping to purchase his delicious wines. The response has really been overwhelming, and we are so grateful to you, Howard, for taking the time out of your schedule to join us tonight and do this for Middlebury. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Antoinette, and thanks, Matt. Thanks, Middlebury. I feel a connection to Middlebury, not just because my daughter's a Feb who started earlier this year, but I grew up on the East Coast, a little place in upstate New York called the Bronx. I spent most of my summers in the Adirondacks, and I went to summer camp on Lake Dunmore, which a few of you may know, just south of Middlebury. But on to Oregon. Welcome to Oregon, although I'm speaking to you from Washington State because that's where I live. I've been involved in the Northwest wine industry for over 45 years now, and now have my own vineyards, winery, having worked through retail, wholesale, national sales on my way. For Oregon, the real key to understanding Oregon wine is its location. Number one, latitude. 45 degrees north is where my vineyard sits. That's the same latitude if you go east on the map. You're into the northern Gaspé Peninsula and even southern Newfoundland. Continue going east, you're in Bordeaux, northern Rhone, and Piemonte. Great wine growing areas. The latitude gives us photoperiod. Day length. So we have very similar growing season to what Northern Europe has. We have a cool climate. My vineyard is in the Willamette Valley. It's 202 acres. It's about 50 miles as the crow flies from the Pacific Ocean. But in between the ocean and my vineyard in the Willamette Valley is a coastal range of mountains that are about 3,000 feet high. To the east, after you transverse the Willamette Valley, you hit the Cascades that are 4,000 to 7,000 feet high, except for the volcanoes that get even higher. In addition, we have three very key soil types in the Willamette Valley, which I'm fortunate enough to have all three at my Erratic Oaks vineyard. The oldest being marine sedimentary soils that are about 55 million years old. That's from when Oregon was under the Pacific Ocean. Next oldest are the volcanic soils that are about 20 million years old. We've had a lot of volcano activity and even have some more recently. Mount St. Helens, I got to see that rather up close and personal, another story for another time. And then our youngest soils are what are called Missoula flood soils. And those are glacial flood soils, about 20,000 years old. And that's from when the continental glaciers came south from what is now Canada. And behind the glaciers formed what the geologists call Glacial Lake Missoula. The geologists think at least 35 times the ice dam broke and massive amounts of water in 1 week, more than the combined Great Lakes, coursed through eastern Washington, carving the coulees, carving the Columbia River Gorge, and then out to the Pacific Ocean. Some of them backwashed into the Willamette Valley, and that gave us some of our last group of soils. That's giving you a quick overview, sort of at 30,000 feet. I thank you all for that you got some wine. I wanted to talk about corked wine because occasionally that happens. My wines are all cork finished, and the bottles that I opened here, none of them were corked, but occasionally that can happen. So what is a corked wine? It's wine that's gotten a chemical from the cork, and the end result is you lose all the fruit character of the wine. So if you smell a wine and it smells like wet cardboard or dirty athletic wear, good chance it's corked. Wine is a fruit beverage. The fruit should show through. And that's something that's special about Oregon wines because we are a terrific fruit growing region. Our wines have wonderful, bright acidity. The wines have modest alcohols. In fact, none of the wines we'll be tasting tonight go over 14%. And that's a rule that I impose on these ventures, but also on previous venture that I sold a few years ago. I believe wines should have good balance. That way they'll live well and they'll taste great and be wonderful with food. Questions. I love questions. So if you have a question, the only bad question is the one that's not asked. So feel free. Antoinette will, Antoinette, you can break in whenever you want if there's a question that is pertinent to where we are, or there'll be time towards the end for Q&A too. But I want to answer your questions. I have things that I can say, but it's most important to answer what you want to hear. So we're going to start with the whites. The order will be the two whites. First, the Centerstone Chardonnay, it's unoaked. Then the Citation Chardonnay. Then the Centerstone Pinot Noir. Then the Citation Willamette Valley Pinot Noir. And lastly, the Citation Oregon Pinot Noir 2005. So the first one, Centerstone, unoaked Chardonnay. It's 100% from my Erratic Oaks vineyard. It's from the Chardonnay block, which is on the top of the hill. Most Oregon wineries, when they do their first white wine, it's Pinot Gris. That is the most widely planted white grape in Oregon. It represents about 20% of the grape acreage in Oregon. Chardonnay only represents about 5% of the grape acreage. But I wanted to do something different, and I thought we had some pretty killer Chardonnay. This is fermented in stainless steel, was aged in stainless steel. And the first thing I get is just wonderful, rich fruit with citrus elements, apples and pears. On the palate, it's long on the finish, rich. There you get the acidity, and there's no burn or heat from a high alcohol.
So Howard, we have a question, which is, what temperature do you typically serve these wines? So why don't we start with Chardonnay, since that's what we're tasting through.
So Chardonnay, I'd say cold cellar temperature. I refrigerate them. I took these out about 45 minutes ago, and they're really at a good temperature now. I don't like white wines ice cold. There's a saying in the wine business, especially when I was in wholesale, you chill to kill. If you make a wine really, really cold, it'll be crisp, but you'll lose all the fruit element. Those fruit elements come with a bit more of the ambient temperature. So a cool white wine is terrific. The reds, I like to start off cool. And even with the first one on a hot summer day, I've been known to throw an ice cube in it. It might be sacrilege, but the fruit comes out beautifully on it, and it makes it a really pleasant sipping temperature.
I was going to say, I thought an ice cube makes it gauche, but I'm glad that you've given us the permission to put it in.
Well, having been in the wine business for 45 years, I guess I'm a wino, so I can do things as I wish.
That's very true. I've got a couple more questions. Why do you choose to leave your Chardonnay unoaked?
I think going back to most wineries do Pinot Gris, and those are typically unoaked. I wanted our Centerstone to be unoaked because it really shows off the fruit that we grow. I didn't think oak would add a huge amount to it, and I wanted for this wine to be at a reasonable price, 20 or under. That I didn't want to complicate it with oak. The next one that we'll have, the Citation Chardonnay, is barrel fermented and barrel aged. So you're getting yin and yang in terms of style of Oregon Chardonnay here. But I really wanted to show off the fruit. And it's a style of wine that I love to drink and drink every day. On Saturday, I was able to get a really good deal on lobsters out here. And we had the Centerstone Chard with steamed lobsters. It's pretty good.
Sounds like a great combo.
Yeah.
So one of the users said that they feel like they're seeing a lot more Oregon Chardonnay. Did the Pinot Gris, are people really moving away from that? I know you said that it was the majority, but what's the shift been?
Pinot Gris is 20% of the acreage. Chardonnay is about 5%. But probably the hottest new trend in Oregon wine is Oregon Chardonnays. Originally, when I got in the wine business out here, there were about 8 wineries in Oregon. There are now over 800. But originally, the clone of Chardonnay planted in Oregon was what was called the Wente or 108 clone. And typically, in a typical Oregon cool climate year, those grapes would deliver a wine that was so tart they'd take the enamel off your teeth. And what we found is we did research, and we started bringing in clones of Chardonnay from Burgundy in France. The Burgundian clones, which these Chardonnays are, totally different. And they ripen better in Oregon. And so we end up getting more interesting Chardonnays. And that has been the more recent discovery.
Okay. Another mid-kid is asking, has this been through malolactic fermentation? And for those who don't know what that is, could you explain?
Great. It went through a 50% malolactic. So what is malolactic? There are two fermentations when you make wine. One is the fermentation, the alcohol fermentation done by yeast, which converts the grape sugars to alcohol, carbon dioxide, and heat. That's typical fermentation. If you're baking bread, you're doing stuff with fermentation. You're making beer, you're doing stuff with fermentation. If you're making spirits, you're doing stuff with fermentation because then you're distilling what you have already fermented. So we have the alcohol fermentation. And then if the acid in the resulting wine is high enough, we may decide to allow for a malolactic fermentation. And a malolactic fermentation is done by a bacterium that converts malic acid, the acid of apples, to lactic acid, the acid of cream or milk. It softens the wine. It does not change the acidity of the wine, except it changes how the wine feels in the mouth, and it broadens the flavor on the palate. That makes sense?
Yeah. A few more questions and then maybe we can switch to the next wine. But do the soil types really make a difference in the taste and texture of wines?
We're still learning a lot on that. I think they do. To what degree, I'm not 100% sure, but I can tell certain regions in the Willamette Valley, if I taste them blind, I'll say, oh, that's Eola Hills, which is very volcanic and very thin soil. In my location, our fruit ends up being very perfumed, but we have all three soil types there. So I'm not seeing massive differences yet, but it's something we're all studying. You ask a different Oregon wine producer, if you have 50 in the room, you're going to get 50 different answers to that question too.
I know I touched upon the wildfires, but someone in the chat was asking how the wildfires might impact this or next year's vintage. And then additionally, in the lens of climate change, how has the warming summers changed what you've been growing and producing?
I'll answer the last question first, somewhat cheekily. The warming summers is turning Oregon into the new Napa. It's been making grape growing a lot easier. We have not had a fire event like we had this year in Oregon, probably for 70 years. We've had droughts, which we had this year. Until today, it really hadn't rained here in the Northwest for almost 2 months. But what we had last week was a dry area, and I think there has been some poor forestry management over the years, and this goes back to some of my botany and forestry days. Fires are part of the overall ecosystems here, but we've had such a buildup of material on the ground that then when something happens, it can be catastrophic. But what made last week particularly bad, you may have heard about the snowstorms in the Rockies. That was actually linked to the fires in Oregon, because what we had was a cold front that pushed down from Canada. It caused snowstorm in the Rockies, but as part of that front pushed west, it triggered a huge windstorm. And we had winds blowing from the east on last Tuesday that went in the 40 to 60 mile an hour range for an extended period of time. And then if you have arcing power lines or substation go, transformer go, or if some Yahoo plays with matches, you end up with terrible fires. My son lives in Ashland, Oregon, where a really bad fire started. He was notified of possible evacuation. The wind blew it away from Ashland, but into the towns of Talent, Phoenix, and into Medford, and just torched those areas. And fortunately, they got most people out. Unfortunately, some people were slow to react, and you end up with complete tragedies. I did hear, in talking with my son, several of his friends and coworkers lost their homes. One of them lives in a trailer park. The park was destroyed, but someone there drove a big rig and is an absolute hero to me. This guy hooked up 6 trailers to his big rig and towed them out of the trailer park through the police lines to safety. The guy's, Max's coworker, still has a home. His wife was evacuated to Grants Pass, so they're all safe. But it's just been devastating. So what is it going to do to this year's vintage? It's been a problem the past few years for grape growers and producers in Southern Oregon, in the Rogue Valley and the Umpqua Valley. It has not been an issue for the Willamette Valley till this year. There were 2 fires that were in some sort of proximity to my vineyard. The closest was burned east of Salem, the Santiam, Detroit area. That was about 25 miles away, the closest it got. There was one on Chehalem Mountain, which was about 30 miles away to the north. There is something called smoke taint. It can affect wines. I was in a 2-hour Zoom meeting earlier today with the Oregon Wine Board, the folks at Oregon State University, some of the folks from Jackson Family, Joel Gott Wines, academics from Australia and California, all chiming in with their expertise. A lot more is known about dealing with smoke and its residues. I'll be down in my vineyard next week. We'll be harvesting towards the end of next week. From what I've seen and heard, I don't think my vineyard's going to have much of a problem, but it is potentially a problem for some people. But there are ways to mitigate. So we're hopeful. We'll see as the crop comes in.
I have a question to transition us to trying the next Chardonnay. What's the difference between oaked and unoaked Chardonnay?
Okay, if you've got both Chardonnays, keep a little bit of the Centerstone in one glass and have a second glass. Because here's the Citation 2015 Chardonnay. It's barrel fermented. So we crush the grapes, we press them right after crushing, and the juice goes right into the barrels. They're 59-gallon French oak barrels, and the wine ferments in the barrel. We watch it closely, and after fermentation, the wine stays in the barrel for 10 months, and we don't rack it. We don't move it to a different barrel. So we keep what the lees, the dead yeast cells, in the barrel. They settle to the bottom of the tank or the barrel, and we do what's called bâtonnage. We take a metal or glass rod and we go into each barrel, and once a month we stir up the dead yeast cells. So we get the benefits of what's called yeast autolysis, the sort of yeastiness, toastiness of the dead yeast cells. So this wine aged 10 months in French oak barrels. 20% of our barrels are new. And we use barrels, treat them as viable barrels that will give off oak characters till they're 5 years old. After 5, then we treat them as neutral, that they won't give off oak character. The newer barrels will give off more oak. The older barrels will give off less oak. So here the nose should be quite different from the first, although there will be similarities in the fruit element. But now you're adding in layers of the oak and the yeast to this wine. It also goes through a full malolactic fermentation in barrel. So this wine should be richer, longer on the palate, more complex. Yeah, it's got all that.
Great.
Now this wine is partially Erratic Oaks fruit, but also I have some friends that grow some pretty nice grapes on the Oregon side of the border in the Walla Walla Valley. So their grapes are in the extreme southeast corner of the Walla Walla Valley. And I found that by combining their grapes with our grapes, we ended up with a far more interesting, richer Chardonnay that was longer on the palate, yet had great acid, modest alcohol, more complex. It'll age beautifully. And I tend to be a traditionalist. I love wines that can age well. I don't like wines that just clobber me over the head, because as I said earlier, wine's made to go with food. For time immemorial of humanity, we've been drinking wine with friends. And I don't think the meal should be about wine. It should be about the wine and food and the friends along with them.
So I know you mentioned the lobster, but other thoughts on pairings with these wines? Any favorites?
So the Citation Chardonnay, we had some fresh Pacific halibut a week ago. This was great with it. We also had it with some tuna, some albacore. It's also really good with anything with cream sauces, so chicken or pastas, because it's got the acidity that will cut through the fats. There are also no hard and fast rules about wine and food. It's really what you like. So we'll experiment. Tonight, I'll go home. I live about 15 miles away, and we'll end up having some of these wines with, I've got some pork loin chops, boneless, marinating. That'll be dinner. I think the 05 Citation is probably going to be the one we focus on, but if we have a sip beforehand, it'll be one of the Chardonnays. And I think my wife is watching in, so now she knows.
She knows what's cooking.
Yep.
Another Middlebury kid is asking, how'd you come up with the name Erratic Oaks for your vineyard?
It sort of named itself in a way. When I bought the property, it was a grass seed farm. And I'm going to pour the next wine so I don't go too far behind and all that. It was a grass seed farm, and it had some beautiful 200 to 400-year-old oak trees on it, dotting the property. And they were gorgeous. I had one of my Dr. Seuss moments And we decided to leave those trees there. It was a Lorax moment. So that's the oak part. The erratic part is when we cleared off a west-facing hillside there, we found 20 big, and I mean big chunks of granite. And there is no granite outcropping in the Willamette Valley. The closest outcropping of granite is 500 miles away to the northeast in northern Idaho and Montana. These are what are called Missoula flood erratics. They came in on those Ice Age floods. We figured that they were embedded in chunks of ice. And as the flood backwashed into the Willamette Valley, some pieces of ice must have come to rest on this west-facing slope. We dragged those chunks of granite up around our 400-year-old oak tree, made our own little Stonehenge, and there I had Erratic Oaks. I've always liked naming things. I came up with Citation, Centerstone. I used to own a big winery in Oregon called Firesteed, which I sold a few years ago. Came up with all those names. I came up with name of a wine brand that the Drouin family produces in Oregon called Cloudline. And I just love names that are figurative, that get people thinking and get them asking great questions. Thank you.
Great. So why don't we turn over to the Pinot?
Okay, we are moving to the dark side, folks. Yeah, I'm Star Wars.
I'm sure you're in good company.
Can you tell I'm a nerd? Some things never leave us. So we have 3 Pinots, and they're all very different styles. The first 2 are 100% from Erratic Oaks and from the exact same blocks, but they are cropped differently, and the winemaking is different. So this first one is a Centerstone. We make this to be fruity, really well balanced. There should be a lot of raspberry, strawberry, blackberry. Notice the theme of berry in it. It's fermented in stainless steel. Goes through malolactic fermentation there. But then it hardly sees oak as we elevate it. It just sort of waves at neutral oak in the process, about a month in oak, because I want this wine to be all about the fruit. We crop it fairly heavily. It's cropped at about 4.5, 5 tons per acre, which helps us get that really bright berry fruit character. Pinot Noir is, I think, the most food-friendly wine out there. This is a wine that can work with fish, but can also work with red meats.
Joel had the same question that I did, which is, what does cropping mean?
Cropping is the cropped load. So the vines will put out a certain amount of fruit each year, and that can vary each year. There are a couple things that will impact how the vine sets fruit. One is happened in August this year for next year, and that is when the bud primordia are set within the vine, and that happens in August of each year. And if you have lovely weather, which we did have, I'm expecting the crop will set a lot of fruit clusters next year. The other is flowering, which happens typically in June. The flowers open, they pollinate. It's pretty much a wind pollination. We had cool, damp weather, some rain, during flowering in June this year. So that limited the crop. We had what we would consider a poor crop set. If we have a big crop set, we may go through the vineyard once or twice in August doing what we call green harvest, clipping off fruit, because we want enough fruit for the vines to ripen it and ripen it to the level we want, depending on the quality that we're growing. So this is fairly heavy crop yield. 4.5 to 5 tons per acre is fairly heavy for Oregon, the Willamette Valley. If you're in Eastern Washington, that would be a modest to light crop yield because they have a much warmer climate. It's more of a continental climate. If you're down in California, it would be a modest to light crop there. But for Oregon, that's pretty big. That answer it, Antoinette? You can ask follow-up questions. You may have muted yourself.
Ooh, sorry. It wouldn't be Zoom if I didn't realize that I muted myself accidentally.
I saw your lips moving.
Someone asked about the fermentation and whether or not you have to do anything to keep the ABV down for different wines.
The way you manage your ABV, alcohol by volume, is not through your fermentation. It's through the sugar in the grapes. So that's why we green harvest. We keep the sugar modestly low. For the Centerstone, we let it get a little bit higher with a lower crop yield for the 2 Citation Pinots. But the fermentation really won't change the alcohol very much. There are some people that do natural wines, natural fermentation. I'm not a fan of that. I like to control the fermentation. That way I know with a specific yeast, by inoculating with it, the flavors that I'll get, because fermentation really will give you flavors. So we look to get our sugars between 21 bricks and 24 bricks, all the way through all wines. But with the Centerstones, we'll be on the lower end of the scale, but some of the fruit will get a little bit higher too. It just happens. Where the Citations, it'll be more the top end.
So folks are wondering how you sort of approach the different pricing for your wines. Some are 20, some are 40. How do you decide what to sell them at and sort of view them in terms of what you're using them for?
I guess I have always used what I call a Burgundian model. I look at the 3 levels of Pinot Noir that we produce, much like what one would find in Burgundy. So the Centerstone would be our village, our basic level, Bourgogne Rouge or village. The Citation Willamette Valley, lower crop yield, more intense fruit, and you'll see it with this next wine. That would be our Premier Cru. You like the Premier Cru vineyards. The Citation Oregon 2005, that's our Grand Cru. That's basically the best that we can make, and we only make a small amount each year. So they're reflections of what our costs are, and then where I think they fit in with the overall world of wine.
So for those who are unfamiliar with that categorization, what does a cru usually denote?
Cru is a level. So in Burgundy, there's sort of 3 levels. There's village level, which is basically village level. Premier Cru is first grow. Those are better vineyards that have been identified over millennia as being really good, consistent producers. Grand Cru, the great growth. Those are the vineyards that have produced consistently great wines that are highly prized.
Great. Do we want to switch to our next Pinot?
Yep, let's move on to, it may look like I'm dumping on the floor, but I've got a dump bucket here. So, Citation 2015 Willamette Valley Pinot. So it's the same vineyard blocks as the Centerstone. Exact same blocks, generally the same farming. But instead of 4.5 to 5 tons an acre, we're down to 2.5 tons per acre. First thing you'll notice, it's darker. You have more skin to juice, and you extract the color of the skin during fermentation. The alcohol that's produced in fermentation pulls the color from the skins. You'll also notice in the nose, less of the bright berry fruit and more of dark fruit. So it'll be more blackberry, plum, cherry, hints of violet coming in. Where the Centerstone with stainless steel fermenters, the Citation reds are done in 1-ton fermenters. We are hand punching down the grapes, piage, twice a day. And that hydrates the skins, extracts color, and extracts tannin. So you get more richness. Then we rack, after fermentation, we rack to barrel, all French oak, 20% new, and this wine is aged 10 months in barrel. Then we bottle. So a lot more handcrafting. So the price goes up, the more handcrafting you do. For those that have both Pinots, do you find a difference? Did you find a difference with the 2 Chardonnays?
If you guys want to share in the chat the differences that you thought between the 2 Chardonnays and the 2 Pinots, I'm happy to share with the group. To bring us to our last wine, someone asked sort of about the aging process. First, they asked about it as it relates to whites and that the good rule of thumb was for 5 years, but can you just speak to the aging process generally? You know, maybe narrow it to these wines in particular, Pinots and Chardonnays.
So if it's California wine, a region that we call Baja, Oregon.
Howard, that is so good.
Then those wines being further south, they're not going to have as much acidity. Their alcohols, their sugars in the grapes will be higher. The resulting alcohols will be higher. So they won't age as well. I keep talking about acid. Why is it so important? Acid is like the skeleton in the human body. It's the backbone. Without our backbone, we disintegrate. We're blobs. Well, if a wine doesn't have backbone, it's sort of unctuous and blobby. Often I've used lemonade as a metaphor. If you have pure lemon juice, it's really tart. If you add a little bit of sugar, it becomes more palatable. You add the right amount of sugar, it's lovely. You add too much sugar, it's unctuous. Wine is a balance of these things. We're blessed in Oregon that we have this great natural acidity. We don't have to add acid. We don't have to add sugar. It's a fruit that we grow. And therefore, the wines are naturally balanced and can age quite well. Our whites will age beautifully. I did a tasting in Toronto 2 years ago and had Chardonnays going back to 2010. They were stellar all the way back. So these wines will age more like their Burgundian counterparts than they will their California counterparts. every wine producer wants you to drink their wine quickly, so you order more. But personally, I think it's fun to save some wines and enjoy them. And these wines, if you've got good cellaring conditions, they'll reward your patience. I've learned to be patient, not just with my children, but I've been a lifelong fly fisherman. And I fly fish for trout, steelhead, and Atlantic salmon in Atlantic Canada. And salmon and steelhead are fish of 1,000 casts. So you have to be patient. It's like being with wine. You can be really well rewarded.
Some folks are asking about how to get their hands on the 2005.
It's available in some markets, but otherwise www.citationwine.com and take advantage of your Middlebury discount. I'm going to run that through the end of the year. I am going to change the shipping deal. It'll go from 100%. I'm going to do 50% because it was sort of clobbering us. So I'll pay half of the UPS ground shipping, and now's a great time for ground shipping. And I'll send a follow-up letter to you all who bought wine outlining this. But also, I'm Howard at citationwine.com. I'm also on Facebook, Howard Rossbach, and Instagram. So you can find me. And I answer questions. I had some questions from people who were looking for wines retail. I was able to help them find something close to them. We're not in every state with our wines, but we do ship.
Yeah, and we'll include all of this in the follow-up email to you guys, contact information for Howard, how to order wines in the future if you want, and anything we've talked about, as well as this session has also been recorded in case you want to watch it again. But do you want to end with any notes on the 2005?
Let's do the 2005.
And then while you're pouring that, I did have a question earlier about stemware. I know this is a very controversial issue. Some people feel very strongly. Do you have preferences or recommendations? And then also in talking about aging, is there a way for people who maybe don't have a wine cellar to best hold on to some bottles? Like, is there a particular way that they should set them up in the apartment, temperatures, etc.?
Okay, wine does not like rapid fluctuations in temperature. Does not like extremes, high and low. So if you are storing in an apartment, I wouldn't do it too long. Let me do it for you, and that's where the 05 comes in. I like my wines to be drinkable when we release them, so that's what we do. And being a crotchety old guy now, we do it my way. I lost my train for a quick second. Senior moment. Revived by wine.
We were talking about stemware and aging.
Yeah, stemware. There is a Riedel Oregon wine glass. It's wonderful. I love them. I would have had them here tonight, but they had my old winery's logo on them. So I think for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, you want a big bowl. That way, when you swirl it, you're covering a fair amount of the glass. Then when you stick your schnoz in, you get a really good hit off it. It increases the pleasure. If you have a narrow, bold wine glass, it will impinge on the fragrances of the wine. So I like a decent sized bowl. These were our wedding glasses, so there you go. That answer the question, Antoinette?
I think so.
Okay. I am going to add a couple things as I'm quickly thinking of them. We are certified sustainable in our vineyard. Sometimes sustainability is important. It is to me. We're certified under a program called LIVE, Low Input Viticulture and Enology. It sits side by side with organic and biodynamic as Oregon certified sustainable. And also all these wines are vegan. So they're good all the way around. Now, the Citation 05. This is a wine we try to make every year. Nature does not always cooperate. It is the best of our best. It's a barrel selection. So it's low cropping of fruit. The fruit comes into the winery. It's destemmed. We don't do any whole cluster fermentations. Get plenty of tannins from the skins. It's destemmed, crushed. We ferment in small 1-ton fermenters, punching down twice a day. Then this wine is aged 18 months in barrel. And I'm going through the barrels. Initially, I'm picking out barrels that I think have problems and flaws. It's a way of weeding out. Then I'm picking to the very best for this wine. We produce less than 1,000 cases a year of it. Later this fall, we'll segue into the 06. But there have been several vintages that we have declassified that just we pulled the plug on. So this wine spends 14 months in barrel. Previous was 10 months. This is 18 months in barrel. Previous is 10 months. So 18 months, year and a half. Then if I like it coming out of barrel, we bottle it. If I don't think it's going to make it, and I've been in the wine business for a long time, I draw on that experience. If I don't think it's going to make it, it goes not to the middle, it goes all the way to the bottom. And we've done that 4 times out of barrel and once after we had bottled and labeled. My second inflection point to decide if we will release it is after it's spent 10 years in bottle. As I said, I'm patient. And I love what happens when great Pinot Noir ages. And I think Oregon is the place in the New World to make truly world-class Pinot Noir. So I put a little money where my mouth is. We age it. And what happens is that those beautiful dark fruits that you got with the last wine, they change, they evolve. And you go from those dark fruits to, there's sort of a mushroomy, fungal forest floor that is on the aroma. Then you take a sip and there's still sweet, rich fruit. That intersection, that's complexity. When people talk about complexity in a wine, right there, the flavor lasts. It's rich. Katie will be having this with the pork chops. This is why I got in the wine business originally, for great, great wine. And by selling the previous winery, I went to bed debt-free that night, and I was able to refocus on this type of wine, which is where my passion is.
Okay, I'm going to do lightning round for a few more questions because I know we're bumping up and over time. But you're the owner and winemaker for Erratic Oaks?
I'm the owner and proprietaire. So
what does that mean?
It's a French term. I'm the final decision maker. I utilize winemakers, but I'm the guy who basically is like Caesar. It's good or it ain't. And I draw on my years in the business. I know exactly what I want something to be. I better make darn sure that we have the grapes grown to produce it and the wine made to those specifications.
Okay. And then what's the differences between bee and wind pollination as it relates to wine?
Well, there's some bees that fly around, but by and large, you look at a grape flower cluster, it ain't pretty. It's just male and female parts. And so it's pretty much the wind that's doing the pollination. There may be a little bees happening, but it's pretty much the wind. There ain't that many bees.
So you mentioned your wines are vegan. What animal products go into wines? Didn't even occur to me.
In fining wine, you can use egg whites to fine. You can use fish bladders to fine. And both of those are not vegan.
Got it. And then lastly, would you age, or sorry, two more. Would you age a Pinot Noir and Chardonnay the same amount of time, or what are your thoughts?
No, I think Pinot can go a little bit longer because it's got tannins, which help the structure of the wine long term. They both have alcohol. If a wine's over 14% alcohol, I get worried about its ageability. I'll tend to drink that wine on a younger basis. But tannins, along with alcohol and acid, those are sort of the three pillars of ageability for wine.
And everyone's loving the, oh, sorry.
You want them all in balance. You don't want one outshining the other. So this is a wine that's 15 years old. We were making decisions 15 years ago in anticipation of tonight, and hopefully people are liking.
I was going to say your 2005 is very, very popular amongst the chat, as are all of your wines. And they want to know, how long would you age that 2005?
I think, it's 15 years old. It's not got another 10 to 15 years ahead of it.
Wow.
But it's pretty damn good right now.
I'd say so. Well, with that, Howard, I want to thank you for your time and for everybody who tuned in. This has been a great fourth edition of Middlebury Wine School. We hope that you guys will join us again. We're going to do one either in November or December, and it's going to focus on organic and biodynamic wines from Austria, Germany, and Northern Italy. So we will be sending information about that. If you or anyone you know who's in the Middlebury community is in the wine industry, we'd love to have them host. We are really excited about continuing this series, especially when we're doing things virtually for the foreseeable future. It's a nice way to connect with Middlebury alumni in the virtual space. So we appreciate you joining, and please feel free to give us any feedback that you guys have, because we do this really for you. So it's great to hear how you've enjoyed or any constructive criticism you have of Middlebury Wine School. So thank you guys again, and thank you, Howard, for doing this for us.
Thank you, Antoinette, Matt. And if you all have questions for me later on, howard@citationwine.com.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to follow up with an email giving you Howard's contact information about ordering the wines if you want to order more, and anything that Howard discussed in this chat, as well as the recording. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers.